We're going to begin this hour, though, with the continued fallout from the Supreme Court's historic ruling on the presidency. It ruled in favor of former President Donald Trump that he and future presidents have absolute immunity, but only when it comes to official acts while in office. Now, this ruling puts the future of Trump's federal election interference case, though, into jeopardy. And last night, Trump's lawyers moved to have his guilty verdict tossed out in his New York hush money criminal trial. So for more analysis, I want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roiphe. Okay, Rebecca, I didn't get a chance to talk to you yesterday about this. Can you put this into perspective for us, the significance of this historic ruling for the office of the presidency in this country, and what sort of precedent it sets?
Yes, sure, Anne-Marie. This is hugely important, both as a decision with impact on the ongoing prosecution of the former president, but more importantly, it is a case that has huge implications for the presidency generally and for this country's democracy, the nature of this country's democracy.
So I want to clarify, because people are tuning in and they're seeing the phrase absolute immunity. It's actually partial immunity in a way, right? So the court ruled that Donald Trump, or any president, has absolute immunity for actions within, and the quote is, the conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority. So as in his role as president, also entitles him to at least, and here's another part of it, presumptive immunity for his remaining official actions. Just help us understand which powers are and are not protected under this immunity decision.
Right. Well, you put your finger on an extremely difficult problem, which is to distinguish between those two kinds of official acts. So just taking one step back, what the Supreme Court says is that there is no immunity for unofficial acts. So certain things that the president does while president have nothing to do with the presidency. And those are unofficial acts, things that were taken perhaps according to a campaign for campaign purposes would be considered unofficial acts. But the vast majority of things that a president does fall into this category of official acts. And then, as you say, the Supreme Court creates two different categories of official acts. Those core constitutional functions, the ones that are explicitly designated by the Constitution, are the ones that receive absolute immunity. And then there are these other official acts, which are not necessarily core to the president's functions, but still a part of what he does as president. And there's a little bit more wiggle room or ambiguity there because the court says he's presumptively immune. And what that means is that a prosecutor would be able to rebut that presumption, show that a prosecution in this instance for these, let's say, outer perimeter official acts is important and would not impinge on executive authority, wouldn't cut too much into the power of the presidency.
So the high court said, look, this is up to the lower court to figure out how this applies to Donald Trump. We don't know the details of all the things he's charged with, so we're going to send it back to you, and you guys can haggle over it. Which brings me to the task that Special Counsel Jack Smith has now. He's going to have to prove to the judge that some of these actions were purely and only sort of motivated by Donald Trump's personal interest and has nothing to do with his role as president. Can you talk a little bit about, what we might expect the special counsel to do and what he's going to have to prove in court?
Yes, absolutely. So there's really only one allegation that falls into that first category that we were talking about, core constitutional functions. And that I think would be pressuring the Department of Justice, trying to get some, Jeffrey Clark, who was in the Department of Justice, to issue that letter saying there was massive fraud in the election. That seems like a count that is just going to have to go from this indictment because it is clearly a core function of the president to be the chief executive enforcement officer. All of the other acts are kind of open to argument. Which category do they fall into? Are they, one, purely personal campaign actions? When he stood up on the ellipse and made that speech, was that a campaign speech? And if so, Jack Smith's going to have to argue that was a personal action for which he enjoys no immunity at all. And then, potentially some of these other questions might be sort of outer perimeter acts for which you might have that presumptive but rebuttable immunity. And so Jack Smith will have to try to argue about each of these counts, which they fall into. And if they do fall into that, perimeter of official acts that are presumptively protected, he will have to argue against that presumption, saying here the prosecution is so necessary for the public interest and really won't cut into what it is that we want to give presidents leeway to do as presidents.
And so part of the reason why the people who don't agree with the Supreme Court, part of the reason they're concerned is that there's a likelihood that whatever decision is made, it will then end up back in front of the Supreme Court, the very same Supreme Court that made this decision. So, it's hard to determine, it's hard to predict what will clearly falls into each bucket because the Supreme Court will ultimately decide.
Right, 100%. And, plus there's this added problem of delay, which is, essentially what the Supreme Court has done is precluded the possibility of any trial before the election. And so, this, if it plays itself out, and again, that's a big if, because there's a possibility that when, if and when former President Trump becomes the next president, that he could simply direct his attorney general to drop this case. And if that happens, it's dead in its tracks. And so, there are ways in which this decision has had a huge impact, again, on the question of the former president's fate and Jack Smith's prosecution, but also on the presidency as a whole going forward, what it means to be an executive or what it means to have power in our democracy has shifted significantly.
Rebecca, really quickly, Donald Trump's attorneys are looking now to overturn the hush money conviction here in New York. I don't think the two have anything to do with each other, but you're the attorney.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right there. I mean, there are these questions in Jack Smith's case that are really close calls about whether they are official acts, for official acts, and so forth. But in the Manhattan case, those incidents, most of them happened even before he was president. There were a few checks signed when he was president, but I think it would be really, really hard to say that those were in either category of official act, and those were just unofficial personal acts for which he was open to prosecution.
All right, Rebecca Roiphe, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, last night, President Biden slammed the Supreme Court's decision condemning the opinion and saying it undermines the rule of law.
Today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what the president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States.
Well, earlier on the stream, I spoke with our Nancy Cordes about the goal of Biden's strongly worded statement.
The White House would say that the point was that something of great import had happened in Washington, D.C., a major ruling by the Supreme Court that shifts our understanding of the power of the presidency, and that as president, of course, he would want to weigh in on that news. But of course, we are 4 months out from Election Day, and you can't ignore election politics. For starters, this gave the president an opportunity once again to remind the American people about former President Trump's conduct on January 6th, particularly now that we know that Trump probably will not go to trial for those actions before Election Day, if ever. And then I think you also can't ignore the fact that the Biden White House, the Biden campaign are still furiously trying to dig out of this hole that was created by the president's debate performance on Thursday. And they viewed this as an opportunity to have him come back, stand in the White House in an official capacity, look vibrant, deliver a very sternly worded speech to try to reassure the American people that he has the vigor to not only run for re-election in November, but to serve another 4 years.